and I'll introduce the next speaker, which is Elliot Bannister. Elliot has been learning Dakota Lakota for over a decade. They live at Standing Rock and provide support as needed in community language efforts. Their primary focus is the Huiake project. I hope I said that right. I often give my introductions and other people have to try and pronounce Māori words, but I'm now having to try and pronounce a Lakota one. A 4-year project to rematriate Dakota Lakota language recordings from institutions around the world and make them accessible to learners via an interactive, searchable and culturally sensitive website. In addition, they're finishing a Master of Education at Sitting Bull College, where they also teach a number of language courses and delight in hearing the new speakers thrive. Welcome, Elliot.
Kia ora, thank you, Maui. And good afternoon to everyone. Chante washte, lea chante washte na pechiuzapi. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And something I forgot to include in the introduction you asked to provide was that I'm speaking today in the capacity of an employee of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. I work in the tribal education department. I'm not a tribal member. I do this work in an effort to be an ally to the work that is already going on in the Standing Rock community and elsewhere in Lakota, Dakota country. So what I want to do today is share the work we've been doing at Standing Rock to rematriate language materials. And I'm going to be giving you a demo of Wo'oyake. And Wo'oyake, as Maui beautifully pronounced, it means stories. And this name is a constant reminder that what we're working with are not just archive materials, it's not just data, but these are real life insights, and these are real stories passed from the mouth of one generation to the next. And our interest in locating Dakota Lakota recordings grew out of a desire to increase students' exposure to real life Dakota Lakota in our classrooms. So a couple of co-teachers and I, back in 2017, we attended a summer course in the use of what language pedagogists call authentic materials. So these are replicable materials that were created by fluent speakers for fluent speakers in real life scenarios. So in a Japanese language classroom, for example, it might be a real life radio ad that teachers can use to expose their students to real life language. And when it was our turn to adapt that to a Lakota lesson plan, we were like, but what do we use? You know, we knew of a couple of recordings here and there the elders are recorded. There was that one on YouTube, or if we scroll back far enough on Facebook, we might find that one, or maybe we should stop by Sitting Bull College Library and see if they have any children's books, something like that. And I tell you, once we scratched the surface, it became this itch that I couldn't ignore. I've spent days and weeks and months just scouring catalogs of libraries and archives and museums. And once you dig deep, you got to dig deeper. There is stuff out there. And perhaps not to the same extent for every North American language as there is for Dakota Lakota, but there is still stuff out there. And as we access these recordings and work to help our community do the same, we encountered a lot of challenges in terms of interpreting that US copyright law through the lens of Dakota Lakota understandings of collective ownership. And 4 of those challenges are what I want to share with you today, with possible workarounds that we found. Although I want to highlight that anything I'm sharing today is not a perfect solution. I have also come here today to listen and to seek advice, and I'm grateful for this space to be vulnerable about the things that we don't know, as well as what we do. So challenge number 1, we'll start there, is facilitating community access to these recordings. Back in 2017, our then director had me write a grant to the National Archives and Records Administration, and they funded this 4-year sort of labor of love, the fruits of which I'm going to demo today here. And our dream was to bring these resources home, at least digitally, and make them available to the people who really need them. And the people who really need them are the current and future speakers of Dakota Lakota language. So our dream was to republish them in a single searchable repository that our people could access them at any time. And this is the space that we built. Our site is a Mukuru site, which many of you may be familiar with, but to give you a very quick overview, users can be enrolled in different communities and different protocols. And likewise, content can be made visible to specific communities and protocols. So only those users with the appropriate constellation of the two will be able to view them. So as an anonymous user here, and someone stop me if you can't see what I'm showing you on the screen here. But when I click browse recordings, I see no results, and that's because I'm an anonymous user. But if I were to create an account and were to attest that I belong to a Dakota Lakota community, and then once my account is created, I go ahead and log in. Let's see. Okay, good. I remembered. Once I log in, I go to browse recordings, and we can see that there is a lot that is available to our users. So these recordings come from a wide variety of collections. We can go to browse collections as well. And each of these collections comes back from a specific institution. So this newspaper comes back from the Smithsonian, this from Colorado University, American Philosophical Society, Smithsonian again. This is actually one of our own from Sitting Bull College, this collection. This from the Minnesota Digital Libraries, University of North Dakota. This again is one of our own at Standing Rock. This from the Library of Congress, Smithsonian, and so on. There's a couple more collections on the next page too. But what this site does is gives the tribe the power to recatalog these collections on our own terms. For example, this one, the Francis Densmore collection, as it's often been known, warrants a single record on the Library of Congress website. And whereas this collection actually represents hundreds of precious audio recordings of about 30 different singers at Standing Rock recorded over 100 years ago. So challenge number 2 is asserting this tribal control. Most of our content coming from public institutions is being made available to the default community that users are enrolled into when they create an account. But if there is content that is private to certain families or to certain ceremony houses or societies, but they still want to use the site to share among their own members, then a community can be created for them as well. So the communities feature will play an ongoing role, I think, in rematriation of these materials back to the right people. Here's a song, for example, from this collection, and it's sung by a man called Shiaka. And I spoke to one of his great grandsons back in October, and he was very excited that this was part of the default community on here. I'm not going to play it, but you can see that, we've been able to add a time synced transcript that plays along with the audio. There's word by word translations in there, as well as line by line translations, which were done by Robert High Eagle. And what we do want to protect against, on the other hand, is exploitation by people with no links to the community, of the sort that Punch Eshi Ray was describing in the previous presentation. Someone from California coming and remixing this song for their SoundCloud or whatever, or maybe a better example, big tech companies who would just love to harvest this data to build their own proprietary AI translation tools, for example. So that's one of the protections that we have in place. And the site is also going to be important in reconnecting these recordings back to the land. So we can see, for example, that this recording was made at Standing Rock. And if we click through to that, we come to the Standing Rock Place page. On here, we can see a couple different lists, a list of recordings that are made at Standing Rock, as well as recordings in which Standing Rock is mentioned. And what I want all Dakota Lakota people watching this to know is that when we go live with this site in a couple of months, you will have full access to these recordings. I want teachers to know that they can, they can print out a transcript to use in your classroom. I hope people learn from these voices and that they use these recordings as models for their own language learning. We want people to put, links to these on Facebook to share with their students or with their family. I think it's a bit like how James so beautifully put it in the first presentation. It's putting that preserve back on that toast. Anyway, let's check out another recording. If I go to the last page here. So this here is the story of Iktomi. Some of you will know that's the one who teaches us what not to do, and it's a story about fighting the giant Ia. So you can see here we've put a full text transcript that matches with the original, but we've also put in the translation that Ella Deloria did when she collected this story, and it's visible. We're honoring the original orthography that was used, as well as providing the phonetic orthography that a lot of learners are used to. Again, I don't want to spend time on this, but I do want to point out that this is one of those stories that should only be retold when there's snow on the ground, which sitting here in Bismarck, North Dakota, there is right now. And this is one of the nice features of Mukadu sites for those communities considering one, is this implementation of traditional knowledge labels. So this specific TK label reminds users that there are seasonal considerations with the sharing of this story. And there are many other TK labels for communicating other sorts of tribal protocols. And then sort of on the American side of things, something else we need to add to this is a notice explaining that the book from which we are republishing this story is in the public domain. And that not only covers, our proverbial, but it also empowers other users to make further adaptations of the text if they wanted to do that. And that sort of leads us to challenge number 3, which is the challenge of respecting US law and the challenge of wanting to respect US law. So, this book was kind of an easy example, relatively speaking. It was published between 1928 and 1977 without a copyright notice, and that means it actually fell into the public domain for us to republish. By contrast, many of the recordings that we are dealing with may have some kind of copyright claim to them. I don't know, for example, the Colorado University project here. Let's see, where did that go? There it is. So there's a couple recordings in there. These were recorded in the 70s, probably joint ownership between the interviewer and the speakers, unless they signed those rights away in some fashion. But being unpublished works, as far as I know, the copyright interest actually remains with those joint owners until 70 years after their passing. And therefore, any of the derivative materials that we're producing in-house, for example, here in a second, you'll see transcripts and translations. Those are going to hinge on that same status. Going back to collections, the George Bush otter is an interesting example. I'll just pull up, I know I'm short of time, so I'll just pull up one example here. Jump into this first story. So, George Bush otter was from just south of Standing Rock, born on the Moreau River, the Hihanwakba, and passed away, I believe. Let me just check here. So he walked on in the late 1800s, which means that the texts are, according to US law, in the public domain. However, the translations and the word glosses that we're leveraging here were done by Ella Deloria, previously unpublished, and therefore probably has the copyright claim until 70 years after her passing in the 1970s. Anyway, confused, so are we. This is this is a whole new field to us, and we had to create a spreadsheet listing every single collection that we're working with, including anything we know about the copyright status of the work itself and any of the derivative materials that we're leveraging as well. And Cornell University Library has a really good guide that has been useful in making estimates about the status of a work, of the works. But it's really going to take the work of the IP attorney that we're working with to validate those things. And I'll wrap up here with challenge number 4, which is just keeping track of all of this stuff. You know, there is another content type on the website, which you probably noticed. We're trying to contextualize these recordings with sort of encyclopedic information about people and places. You know, that's where these recordings were created, or the people that created them, as well as people and places that are mentioned inside the recordings too. So I'll pull up an example here. This is from the Joseph Whitebull manuscript, which has been rematriated from the University of North Dakota. And another one that has a translation that we're actually using that's probably still in copyright as well, but you know, it's a risk we're willing to take. So anyway, to give you an example of that sort of encyclopedic information, if we click on the name Joseph Whitebull within this transcript, we're taken to his page, and we're trying to use these photographs, historical photographs, to provide users with just that reconnection with the voices inside these recordings. So with this content type, you know, we've linked back to the Denver Public Library in accordance with their terms of use. And also, likewise, if we click on a place page, passed away in South Dakota, you know, we have kind of stock images to just make the place pages a little more interesting as well. Something we've had to do, hopefully you can see the media assets spreadsheet that I've pulled up here. I strongly recommend, if you're doing a project like this, to keep good track of permissions to reuse any kind of media assets that you are using. So if I search for South Dakota here, I can find, let's see, I can find that image that we use for the South Dakota place page, and also alongside that, you know, the source where we got it from, as well as the author that we need to credit because it was issued under a Creative Commons license. So we're leveraging as much public domain and Creative Commons stuff as we can. It's not always possible. For example, you know, just even here, there's a cool photo or a cool picture of McLaughlin that we wanted to use, which we don't yet have the rights for. But I'll wrap up here, Jane, and just say that, you know, realistically, and I'll leave this as a takeaway, is that all of this, I think, is an exercise in risk assessment. You know, not all, but most of the institutions that we're working with have been very forthcoming about providing digital copies of these collections. And even if the copyright to republish isn't ours, then, you know, they're not about to sue us. A future endeavor could be formalizing our right to republish in some sort of written license, but we haven't needed it so far. And there is also the question of whether tribes have some sort of immunity from copyright infringement, which is something I would love to hear DJF weigh in on. But it is a balancing act, and the balance between avoiding legal challenges with the need to just put out these recordings, most of which have been gatekept for so long, back into the hands of the people that they were made for. And of course, I'm lucky enough to work with people who are experts in walking in two worlds. And I wanted to end just by acknowledging them, as the production of this story bank and preparing the recordings for rematriation to the people takes a whole community. So I just wanted to put their names up on the screen there to finish so that we can acknowledge them as well. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the next presentation.
Thanks so much, Elliot, and thank you for joining us and sharing what you've been doing with the Mukurtu site in order to create different kinds of strategies for controlling language materials, and particularly their return from the many institutions that hold them.